Imagine walking into a luxury hotel, minding your own business, only to be treated like an outsider. That's exactly what happened to a man who was just trying to enjoy his stay. The hotel manager, suspicious of his presence, immediately assumed he didn't belong and threatened to kick him out. Little did the manager know, this man wasn't just another guest. As the tension rises, the truth begins to unfold, and what happens next will leave you speechless. What happens when assumptions backfire? Stay tuned as we watch the powerful moment when the hotel manager learns a hard lesson about respect, judgment, and who really holds the power. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this story unfolds. Keep watching to see how instant karma hits in the most unexpected way. As the man walked into the lobby, everything seemed perfectly normal. He was well-dressed, carrying himself confidently as he approached the front desk. However, the hotel manager, noticing him, couldn't shake off a feeling of doubt. His eyes narrowed, and without hesitation, he approached the man. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone colder than usual. The man, thinking nothing of it, politely explained he had a reservation, but the manager wasn't convinced. "I'm afraid I'll need to ask you to leave," he said, his words sharp and dismissive. The man was taken aback, unsure of what had just happened. Why was he being treated this way? Was it his appearance? The manager, clearly assuming the man was an intruder, refused to listen to reason. But as the situation unfolded, the truth would soon come crashing down, and the manager was about to learn a very important lesson. The tension in the air was thick as the man tried to remain calm. He knew something wasn't right, but he couldn't figure out why the manager was so hostile. He tried to reason with him, offering proof of his reservation, but the manager's skepticism only grew. The man's patience started to wear thin. What was supposed to be a relaxing stay had suddenly turned into an uncomfortable confrontation. As the manager continued to insist he was just doing his job, other guests in the lobby began to watch, sensing something was off. Some gave nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene, but there was one guest who caught on. A regular at the hotel, she had noticed the manager's behavior before, and it never seemed to end well. She overheard bits of the exchange and, sensing trouble, decided to step in. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice firm but measured. The manager quickly turned to her, irritation flashing across his face. "It's none of your business," he snapped, but she wasn't backing down. The woman knew the man at the desk. He was the hotel's owner, a frequent visitor to his own establishment. She had seen him before, walking through the halls, talking to staff, always with a quiet, commanding presence. She had no idea what had triggered the manager's behavior today, but she could already tell things weren't adding up. The guests around them started to murmur, some of them sensing that something was about to unfold, but no one knew just how big of a shock was coming. Would the manager back down? Or would the confrontation escalate further? The air was electric with the weight of an undeniable truth that was just about to come to light. The tension in the lobby grew unbearable as the man stood his ground, but the manager didn't back off. He was convinced he was right, his pride now driving the situation further. The hotel's reputation was on the line, and to him, letting someone suspicious slip by would be an unforgivable mistake. His grip on the counter tightened, his eyes flashing with stubbornness, but the man's calm demeanor only seemed to make him angrier. The other guests, now whispering, were caught in a strange mix of disbelief and curiosity. The woman who had stepped in was still watching, her gaze flicking between the manager and the man. She could see it building, the quiet storm. Every moment that passed without the manager backing down only made things worse. She could feel the man's frustration rising. He wasn't going to let this slide, not after everything he had worked for. "Do you know who I am?" the man finally asked, his voice low but full of authority. He hadn't wanted to reveal his identity just yet, but it seemed like the time had come. He stared the manager down, waiting for him to answer, to make some acknowledgement of the growing pressure in the room. The manager's expression faltered for a brief moment, just long enough to let the tension sink deeper. But he quickly recovered, refusing to acknowledge any possibility that he might be wrong. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, some already pulling out their phones, sensing a moment that could go viral. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the hotel's distant elevator dinging as if time itself was pausing. "You thought what?" Mr. Daniels interrupted, stepping closer, his gaze cutting through the manager. "That because he didn't look the way you expected, he didn't belong." The manager flinched at the accusation, but Mr. Daniels wasn't finished. "I've built this hotel from the ground up, and I've hired you to make sure nothing like this happens. But today, you've made me question everything." The guests, still watching, could feel the weight of the moment. Some were already pulling out their phones to record, but others were too stunned to move. The manager was on the verge of a breakdown, the reality of his mistake settling in. Just as it seemed like the manager might lose everything, Mr. Daniels turned toward him, his expression softening slightly. "But," he said, his voice quieter now, "I believe in second chances." The manager blinked, confused. Was he being spared? Was Mr. Daniels going to let him off the hook? Before he could even voice his relief, Mr. Daniels added one final line that hit like a gut punch. "Not for you, though. I'll be letting you go today." The words were final. No negotiation, no room for discussion. The manager's shoulders slumped, the color drained from his face as the realization set in. He had gone too far. The manager's face reddened, but he wasn't backing down. "I don't care who you are," he snapped, his voice rising. "If you don't have a valid reservation, you need to leave now." The words were harsh, final. It felt like the breaking point, the moment when things could either be smoothed over or explode into chaos. But just as the man opened his mouth to respond, the woman stepped closer to the counter, her voice cutting through the growing storm. "Maybe you should take a look at the guest list, don't you think?" she said, her tone sharp and steady. Her words hung in the air, and the manager's eyes darted to her. Something was happening, something he wasn't prepared for. The truth was inching closer, and everyone in that room knew it. The manager hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the woman who had spoken. A bead of sweat trickled down his forehead. He had no idea what she meant, but something about her tone suggested he had misjudged the situation terribly. His hand still gripped the counter, knuckles white, but the confidence he once had was now slipping away. The murmurs in the lobby were growing louder, and more guests were noticing. The whole room seemed to hold its breath as they waited for the next move. The man at the counter stood still, his face unreadable, but there was a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Without another word, the woman pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. She looked up at the manager, her gaze unwavering. "You might want to check your own records before making any more assumptions," she said, her voice firm but calm. The words felt like a challenge, and the manager bristled. Before he could respond, she turned to the man at the desk. "You didn't think to tell him, did you?" she asked, her eyes glinting with a hint of mischief. The man looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something like amusement, but tinged with quiet fury. He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. Suddenly, the woman pressed the phone to her ear, speaking low but clearly. "Hello, I need to speak with Mr. Daniels, please. It's urgent." A few moments passed, and the manager's patience was running thin. He shot her an irritated look, about to tell her to mind her own business, when she turned back toward him. "Oh, he's coming in now," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You might want to get ready." The manager froze. "What are you talking about?" The door to the hotel's back office opened, and in walked a tall figure. The man's eyes widened as he recognized the newcomer, a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a sharp suit. He had a presence that commanded